Next up, I would like to introduce Austin Brandt. Austin is the power planner for the Cape Light Compact, a member of the Cape Cod Technology Board of Directors. And Austin's going to be our moderator today and introduce our guests. So Austin, take it away.
Great, thanks, Bert. I'll introduce the topic a little bit before introducing our guests. So as we're all aware, Massachusetts has aggressive solar adoption policies, fortunately for the planet. And in recent years, solar energy projects especially have exploded across the state in part thanks to those policies. And as part of that trend, the field of players in the solar industry has become larger and more diverse in Massachusetts. So for this installment of the Coffee Q&A, we're going to focus on the intersection, but in particular between the solar industry and Massachusetts farmers, and how those two industries are coming together to advance solar across the state. So we have three guests with us this morning to discuss this topic. We have River Strong, who is the Associate Director of the UMass Clean Energy Extension. We have Gerry Kennedy, Director of the Division of Agricultural Conservation and Technical Assistance. And we have Gerry Palano, who is the Alternative Energy Specialist with the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. So River, Jared, and Gerry are going to tell us about how solar developers and farmers are teaming up to create these renewable energy projects and the resources that the state and the university provides. So with that, I'm going to kick it off by asking River.
Thanks, Austin. And I just want to say thanks to everybody on the council and everybody who's here today for inviting us. Really excited for the conversation and really welcome questions at any point. We really appreciate all of the support and recognition that this program is getting. And just as a point of background, I'm River Strong, Associate Director at Clean Energy Extension, as Austin said. And Extension is a part of land-grant universities, of which UMass is. Back in the 1860s, there was a Land Grant Act that dedicated federal lands for states to build institutions of higher education. And it was kind of a GI Bill of the Civil War. And as part of that, they developed what's called Extension, which was the outreach aspect of the universities. So the extensions were designed to get things out of the ivory tower and out to the people and communities that hosted these institutions. And provide public good. So really it's about service, education, and research is really what extension. And back in the day, that was based around the industries of the time, which were mostly agriculture and engineering. And in the last 100+ years, that's expanded into other areas like nutrition and water resources, and probably most recently, clean energy, being an area of public good and public research and exploration. So there's probably a dozen or more clean energy extension programs around the country. Every state in the nation has at least one land-grant university, and clean energy extensions are starting to pop up as this becomes more of a point of interest in the public's mind. We at the UMass Clean Energy Extension were about 6 years old, and we have funding primarily from the Department of Energy Resources, the state energy office. And our mission is to broadly help the Commonwealth meet its clean energy and greenhouse gas climate change goals. And we do that in lots of different ways. I kind of group our work into 4 buckets, primarily technical assistance, which is going out and helping folks, underserved populations, communities, nonprofits, that kind of thing, figure out how to do clean energy. We also do what's called market development, which broadly support markets that have to do with clean energy, that might be battery storage or solar. In this case, we're supporting and helping support the SMART program, the solar incentive program. We also do collaborative applied research, working with others in the university that touch clean energy, that might be resource economics or planning or engineering, and then bringing that research out into communities. And then finally, workforce development, professional development. So helping the university meet its educational mission, working a lot with students, so engage students in a lot of projects that we work on. So that's a flavor of what extension is. And I personally have been there about 5 years. I came about a year after it started, working with Dwayne Brager, who's the director there. And I have a background in engineering and creative writing, of all things, and also clean energy consulting and greenhouse gas management, business sustainability. So before this, I was doing consulting, and this was a way to bring consulting back to the into the university space and provide hopefully some value to the Commonwealth. And I do want to say that we work closely with state agencies. I mentioned DOER, but MDR is a valued partner. We really appreciate our partnership with them, and DCR and Mass Clean Energy Center, and lots of others. So we really work to help state move towards clean energy goals.
Great, thanks, River. I wish we had some more of your creative writing in the smart regs. They are not very fun to go through, I got to tell you. So thanks for telling us a little bit about your background and the role of the extension and what the extension is in Massachusetts. So I want to turn to Gerry and Jared and ask you both about your background. And after that, if you could tell us a little bit more about the Department of Agricultural Resources where you work and the role that the DAR plays in the solar energy context.
Sure. Gerry, you want to go?
Up to you.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. And I will repeat and ditto what River had mentioned early on. Thanking the council to inviting us today to speak about this program that we have, and how appreciative we are of your interest in the SMART program in general, but as well this technology, this concept of dual use. So thank you for inviting us today. We look forward to a lively conversation. And I will tell you that I began work in this field as a result of being at UMass in the first fuel oil crises we had. So as I can see from the videos here, most of you were not even born then. But we went through the crisis, and alternative energy started becoming a real popular topic. And UMass had what was called the first ever Toward Tomorrow Fair, and exhibited throughout the campus were all types of new renewable energy technologies like solar PV at the time. Solar thermal was becoming popular, but wind turbines. Professor Hieronymus, who we ultimately got to name the grandfather or the godfather of wind. So that really just, I was just out of college. I really was floating, didn't know what I was doing. I said, this is what I want to do. And I became involved in energy efficiency, renewable energy ever since. And I've been doing it in the private sector, primarily in the private sector, in consulting engineering, energy service company, et cetera. And joined Mass Department of Agricultural Resources when the Patrick administration came in. And there was a need to have someone devoted directly with farms and agriculture across the state. Most of what they were trying to do energy-wise was all in one big bucket, which wasn't a bad thing, but it wasn't giving them enough devoted attention. There weren't any specific programs for farms and agriculture in the state. And I was hired to try to bring those together. And that's what I've done since 2007. And that's the role that I play. And I work closely with Jared, who is the director of our technical assistance division. Jared?
Thanks. And again, thank you for the opportunity to get the word out about this technology. You know, I think the state is really at the head of the pack when it comes to innovation and incentivizing this type of technology. So it's nice to have the opportunity to share the work that we're doing with you. I'm Jared Kennedy. I direct our Division of Agricultural Conservation and Technical Assistance, and we're a division within the Department of Agricultural Resources. Our focus areas are agricultural land protection, which includes a program known as the Agricultural Preservation Restriction Program. This is a program that protects land in perpetuity for agricultural purposes. So the state enters into an agreement with landowners to protect their land for agricultural purposes forever. On the Cape, probably the most notable APR project that we have would be the Country Farm Estate project in Sandwich, which is a 200+ acre parcel of prime soil near the Mass Military Reservation there. The division is also responsible for a number of funding programs. So we have a portfolio of grant programs that are available to farmers and also to some entities that are involved in supporting the food system. And they range from programs that support the food system and food security and food safety through programs that will provide funding to farmers for equipment to support better compost practices on farms, through our climate resiliency program or our climate smart agriculture program, which supports smart soil management practices on farms. And also, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, our agricultural energy grant program, which Gerry coordinates. So we're a fairly small agency, about 75 to 80 full-time employees, so fairly small for a state agency. We are one of the departments within the Secretariat of Energy and Environmental Affairs. So our sister departments would be the Department of Conservation and Recreation, DCR, Department of Fish and Game, DEP, and also the Department of Energy Resources. So back around the time when Gerry joined the department, the Patrick administration made an effort to join what was called the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs with the Energy Secretariat. So we became an Energy and Environmental Affairs Secretariat. And the secretary who answers to the governor is Kathleen Theo-Herides, who was very active working on climate issues. In fact, her name before her moniker before she became the secretary was Climate Katie. So she worked a lot with the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, and many of the towns on the Cape would be familiar with that. So that's where we're located within state government. And some of what we do within the department, our commissioner is John LeBeau. My background briefly is that I've been there for about 20 years in a variety of different roles, from working within the crop and pest services section as a groundwater chemist. My background is in chemistry. I used to work in the private sector in an agrochemical company looking at environmental impacts. And over time, my position for certainly the last 10 years has been to oversee this division, which gives me the opportunity to work with people like Gerry, who really know the details on these types of issues. And you're going to be primarily hearing from Gerry and certainly River on this issue today.
Thank you both. What sounds like many state employees, you guys have a lot on your plate. Could you take a step back and give us a high-level overview of the idea, the incentive program for installing renewable energy, and particularly solar on farms, and why the state wants to incentivize the deployment of solar energy on agricultural land?
Sure. Jared, I'll take it.
Yep, you did.
Yeah, the real primary intention of the incentive in the SMART program, and maybe I back up just a little bit, Austin, the program that this all falls under, the umbrella, is SMART, which is Solar Mass Renewable Target. And for those who may not be familiar with it, it is really the continuation of Massachusetts' efforts to incentivize solar. It kind of began with the Mass Clean Energy Center or Renewable Energy Trust and their rebate grant programs. and turned into an SREC program in the early teens, 2013, 2014, where we installed over 1,600 megawatts in a real short amount of time. Governor Baker said, let's keep this thing going, and then put out somewhat of an order to the Department of Energy Resources to come up with another program. And that's where SMART came into play. SMART started off as 1,600 megawatts. It's different from the earlier programs like SRECs and the rebates and the incentives in that it's really location-based focused, where the earlier programs were predominantly trying to encourage and keep the solar industry alive and well in Massachusetts. So that in this SMART program, you'll see a lot of location-based focus on adders or subtractors. And the program has now been expanded as of last July to now 3,200 megawatts. The first 1,600 megawatts just about gobbled up within the first 6 to 8 months, mostly from runoff or from the SREC program, probably, but still, nonetheless, a real attractive program. The dual use program, which is just a component of the overall SMART program, as one of the categories, and again, location-based is what I had mentioned earlier on. We've divided the land in the program between agricultural and non-agricultural. The primary intention of incentivizing solar on agricultural land was to keep that land open and productive. What we were finding out through the 2000 teens, and we were getting as many phone calls as other agencies, is that a lot of our prime land, a lot of our important farmland was being quote unquote covered up. And what were you going to do? What were you doing about it? I was just going to let this happen. We met, multiple agencies met for at least 2 years trying to uncover and see if there was any control that we had or authority that we had that we could work with local landowners. And it really came down to us only if it was a program that we had some authority on, such as APR that Gerard mentioned, or a covenant like farm viability, or if it was state land and owned, or if it actually triggered the rules of MEPA, which most of these projects fell well under. So in the end, we said, you know what, we really have no authority. We can't just go in and tell someone, no, you can't put solar on this important farmland. Concurrently with that, we had been working with a trio of people out in Western Mass, and maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit, Austin, but that's what really started the dual use effort in our state back in 2011. David Marley, a construction gentleman, gave me a call and said, you know, I love farmland. I love to try to do solar, but why can't we do both? Why are we just wanting to do one? The two could be mutually together. So he teamed up with UMass and another private enterprise, Berkshire Management Company. They solicited funding from a number of organizations, including the state, and put together this 16.9 kW dual use pilot project sitting right behind River's background, with panels that are spaced differently. They're on sliders. You can move them. Well, you could, now they're bolted down. 2 rows of them. And the whole intention was, what can we do under these, using graduate students to help us understand. And once that started happening, then we started seeing more interest in people saying, maybe we can do this on a much larger scale. And it took until the SMART program to come around, when someone at the Department of Energy Resources, along with the effort of putting together a stakeholder group, found that under this new direction to put together a continuation of the SREC program, why don't we try it here? So it was introduced originally as an agricultural canopy. It's since been renamed an agricultural solar tariff generation unit, an AS2, if it's easy to pronounce as an acronym. But the dual use, again, primary intention was, okay, let's go to the next level. Let's give farms and developers an option. let's see if instead of covering the land up for 25 years, which we will say we completely respect, we appreciate the farm's need for alternative revenue streams. If they, needed and felt that that was going to keep their farm alive for the next 20, 25 years, getting a check that can help with that, we completely appreciated that. But we said maybe we can take it to the next level, give them an option of actually doing, growing and keeping that land productive. And that was really the prime intention of trying to keep this as part of this new solar program. And the program has started in November of 2018. And we've been working with the UMass Clean Energy Extension River as part of the group that we collaborated with, as well as with obviously the prime authority of the program, which is the Department of Energy Resources. So if you go through that SMART program, you're going to see that we are just one component. We're in category 1. If your land is in any of the important farmlands, or if you're in 61A, you must install a dual use project if you want to do a ground mounted system, or if you want to do a ground mounted system and not a dual use, you need to keep the generation under 200% of what the farm actually uses. There are some other options in there as well. But I think the dual use concept really took off with this private public partnership out in Amherst back in 2011 that got everyone interested in trying to see if we can take this to the next level. We're part of our national movement, the National Renewable Energy Lab. We meet every 3 months. There's got to be, 30, 40, 50 people down that show up in those meetings. Early on, there were maybe a half a dozen to a dozen of us. So we've got multiple states in the country all trying to see if we can figure this out. There's actually an international agrivoltaics conference now. This year 2 is coming up this year. Last year was the first time. So we're able now to share our information with a number of countries across the world and try to figure out what's lacking and what we can all do to improve this whole technology. So I don't know if that's too much of a overview, Austin. I apologize if I went beyond, but hopefully it summarizes both the SMART program itself, which again has a number of non-agricultural offerings that incentivize more solar development in the state, as well as agriculture.
If I could just add,
that was a great
Austin and Gerry, just quickly, I think it is notable as part of this program that Massachusetts is the only state that has actually created a regulatory structure and an incentive program to advance this technology. So when I said earlier that we were at the head of the pack, we really are in terms of innovating in this particular area, not just through pilot programs, but through actual real projects that are going in the ground right now.
Great. I appreciate the overview and the great explanation of how SMART works. It sounds like this was really developed in response to a trend that the state was seeing in the redevelopment of this farmland, and making sure that going forward, these solar projects that were being developed were not going to reduce or incentivize farm owners to make sure that they were not going to reduce the productive agricultural capacity of the land. So bring it back to ground level. Let's say I'm a farmer and I'm interested in installing solar on my property. Where do you guys come into the process of me getting that project approved under the SMART program?
If you go to the DOER website, there's a pretty laid out process for what you go through. The tariff generation unit for agriculture, the dual use, requires a predetermination approval. So you would be submitting a document to the Department of Energy Resources that defines your project, how you plan to build it, what you're planning to grow. And this is where River and the UMass team really come into play, and they are a big part of the collaboration. So we always try to work with the farm and the developer directly but the process really begins with them. Some of them know what they want to do. Some of them don't know what they want to do, Austin. So the beginning point is really to email and put a call into River's office and say, hey, we want to get involved in this. How can you help us? And then River, if you want to take it from there, they've developed a great determination. We put together a great predetermination application that's really primarily based agriculturally in terms of what are you trying to grow? What do you got for machinery? How are you going to get equipment in and around this? It's really meant to educate the farmer. It's really meant to tell the farm, hey, you didn't have this solar system here before. You're going to have one after the fact. Let's see if we can make sure we uncover all the elephants so you're not surprised that, uh-oh, I forgot this. It's a great document and it's a great collaboration. But River, maybe you can do a little better at the details of how that collaboration works.
Sure. Austin, should I jump in here?
Absolutely, please.
Great. So yeah, typically the relationship is between a farmer or landowner and a solar developer. So they tend to find each other one way or another through networking, and because the developer is going to come in with the solar expertise, and only a subset of developers will have an interest or expertise in dual use applications, because there are requirements, like, for example, no concrete is going to go into these fields, so there needs to be certain ways that these are attached to the land that resist the loading from wind and that kind of thing. So there's some technical requirements, and not all solar installers, developers are going to have that expertise. And only obviously a subset of farmers who are going to be interested in doing this. And this is, somewhat of an experiment. There is a lot that's known, but there's even more that's not known about how well agriculture and solar work together. For example, when you introduce shade onto a field, how much can you grow? And there is some preliminary research, and we've done some here at UMass. That's what's going on behind me. And there's more research coming. I will mention, we can talk about it more later if we have time, but we're awarded approved for an award from DOE to do even more research on dual use and its efficacy and how well it works, because there is a real gap of knowledge around robust research, and things like not just shade, but how about irrigation, and how do you move the equipment around these things, and what about grazing, and how do you move your fencing around, and what about soil health and microbes in the soil? So there's lots of considerations to think about. So we engage with the program on a couple levels. One is this research side, but two is programmatically. What we typically see, the way this comes in, is farmers and developers have found each other and are working in partnership, and they submit this predetermination application as a partnership to us to review and to weigh in on and provide some guidance on. So just to be clear, we don't have any decision-making role in these. We're purely advisory. And I'm with the Clean Energy Extension, so we bring some solar expertise and some technical expertise, but our colleagues at Extension are agricultural experts. So we have grazing experts and vegetable experts, and we're seeing applications from across the agricultural board, poultry and sheep and cows and certainly vegetables and hay. So we look at these predetermined applications. They're maybe 10 or 12 pages of the plan that the installer and the farmer have put together about how they're going to work with solar and estimate their yields that they'll get from their crops, for example, or how they're going to manage their rotational grazing. So lots of specifics, and we'll review that plan along with our agricultural colleagues, and then we'll weigh in with what we call kind of a letter, a comment letter that articulates wherever we might have concerns or questions, and then we send that back to that team for their consideration, and they can take what they want from that. They don't need to take any of our advice or questions, or we can engage in a conversation, and they can revise their plan based on our questions. They might also have an agronomy person on their side, an expert that they're working with, and then they can resubmit it to us And we also often go out on site visits and talk with them and look at the land, more so in non-COVID times, but we've done a few even during COVID with precautions. So we're here as helpers and as advisors at UMass. And then ultimately they will submit a final predetermination. So they submitted it to us as a draft, and we'll bounce that draft back and forth. And then they'll ultimately submit a final predetermination application to MDAR and DOER, who have the ultimate decision-making capacity. So that's really us. We're just really advisors and helpers. And we have some basis in that from our research and our experience and our team.
Thank you, River.
So
Thanks.
advising the landowners on how to make sure they continue to get agricultural production out of their land even after the solar installation, and how to be compatible with the solar installation. I'm curious, the picture behind you, the pilot project you mentioned, we had a question come in. Do you know what's growing under those panels?
Specifically, Gerry, you may know more, but that research project is about 5 years old, I think. That was started by Dr. Stephen Herbert at UMass, and they're looking at vegetable crops like kale and Swiss chard and peppers and beans, and looking very closely at their yields and adjusting the panel spacing so they adjust the amount of sunlight that reaches those various crops, and kind of tightly control on how those crops are planted and the yields that they get from those. So it's a range of vegetable crops. And I'll just say anecdotally that typically the less sun these vegetables have gotten, the less yield that they've gotten. Hasn't been no yield, but it's certainly been less, which you might expect, right? If you have a garden and part of it's shaded by the house, you'll get less. That said, there was a drought year, I think in 2017, 18, and the vegetables in the shade actually did better because of moisture. I mean, the guess was because of moisture retention, because the other vegetables were getting more dried out than the ones. So it's really, specific by location and by the particular situation. You can't just say across the board that more shade is bad.
Yep. And if I can add to that, River, Austin, there are 2 rows of those panels, and the spacing between those panels varied between 2 feet all the way up to 5 feet. In front of each of those 2 rows is the control group. Those get full sun. So they try to plant something in front of those panels that matches what's being planted behind the panels. Yeah, and I think that's it. A wide range: spinach, cabbages, saw tomatoes last year, a variety of crops being tried and trialed to see and compared to the control group to see, to have us try to gain more knowledge of the photosynthetic active radiation needs of these plants.
And I'll just add one more thing, Austin, on that. I talked about the predetermination form that they submit on the front end, and then at the end of each year, they'll submit what's called an annual report, which is basically a look at how they did against the plans that they had submitted. So what kind of yields did you get? How did the equipment work around the panels? So a kind of a summary of how it went. And that's just so we can continue to gain knowledge about how these work. So that's more anecdotal knowledge, but it'll help us as we go forward in understanding how to advise projects going into the future. So they'll do that for the lifetime of the system. Submit that in over.
You guys are continually gathering information, it sounds like.
Yes.
Yep.
That's great. We had an audience question. Here on the Cape, along with a lot of the rest of southeastern Mass, we of course have a lot of cranberry bogs, and we were curious whether there's any experience that you guys have or have seen these installations done on cranberry bogs, and what some of the major differences of that type of agriculture versus others might be.
Yeah, I'll take that. One of the major advances that was made for cranberry bogs was the Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, who took a look at not necessarily upland, but actually wetland rules and regulations that pertain to developing anything in wetland areas. And they went through a pretty lengthy process of review whether or not to allow a solar project to be built on a wetland above the cranberry bogs. And they, after reviewing the regulations, the smart regulations and the guidelines, felt that if the project adhered to the regulations and guidelines, and only for the wetlands associated with cranberry bogs, and then they also went through the process, the notice of intent, et cetera. They still have to go through the regular process of getting an approval. And they could then possibly meet the requirements in a wetland area, not necessarily, again, an upland bog. And they could possibly get an approval to build a solar project on a cranberry bog. So that was a major advance, never before happened. And yes, we have a number of cranberry bog projects that have passed the predetermination phase. And in fact, if you get the local Carver newspaper, last night's newspaper, I got sent to me from the Cape Cod Cranberry Association, an article about 2 projects that are now getting installed in Carver. And the length that we went through to better understand whether cranberries can grow and under what sunlight conditions. A large amount of effort science-wise was put into looking at this. And one of the extensions that comes out of the UMass group is the cranberry extension in Wareham. And so we work closely with that team, taking a look at what was being proposed by the developer. And they did a mock-up. We understand it was only a 3-month mock-up, but it was intended just to see more about how much indirect sunlight, how much moisture, how much potential disease may come from this early study. It's by no means meant to be peer-reviewed complete. It was a short study just to see what kind of information and data we could get sensing-wise from the program, from the installation, to see whether or not there was a possibility of having cranberries be a dual-use potential for the program. One of the things about cranberries that does help them is their light saturation point, which is fairly low. It's without getting into those real details, but light saturation generally is on an order of units of around 1,500. Cranberries, they saturate at 500, which means that on a sunny day, any light that is reaching the cranberry plant and the cranberry that is above 500 really isn't used by the cranberry. So that means they can tolerate a lot less sunlight than plants that are really sun-loving. So cranberries aren't necessarily a sun-loving plant. And that was something that was discovered as we went through this whole process. And again, through the UMass Cranberry Extension. So after, again, a 9-month effort of reviewing a number of documents and studies, and after this mock-up went in place and some of the early data that came back, and again, I want to emphasize, by no means meant to be final. The feeling was, that we think there's a good chance that we'll be able to have productive crops and there's a variety of cranberries. They all have their own different unique needs, but I think it's that low light saturation point that they have that gives giving everyone the confidence that we're going to be able to have cranberry and solar mixed together. So we've got a number of projects out there, and like I said, the news last night, the first 2 are now getting installed and being put in, and we're looking forward to see the results of what these will be.
Great. Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of research going into that, and maybe we can expect to see more of those coming online, maybe even some on the Cape in the future.
Yeah,
Did you have something you wanted to add, River?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I did mention this DOE sponsored research that's coming up. We'll be kicking that off hopefully in May or June. And it's a 3-year study looking at dual use around the state, something like 6 or 7 different sites and different applications, 3 of which are going to be cranberries. So 2 in Carver, Gerry mentioned, and 1 in Clinton. So there's going to be, stay tuned, there's going to be much more research that's coming out of that. And I I put a link into one of our web pages that highlights the existing cranberry research that Gerry was talking about with our partners at the Cranberry Station, part of UMass. And by the way, on our website, we have lots of fact sheets. That's another role we play, is just kind of generally educating the marketplace and folks that are interested. So we have fact sheets about dual use and the SMART program and how to get into it. And so feel free to explore our website on that.
I want to shift a little bit to the solar panels and the installations themselves. We had an audience question that kind of dovetails with one of the ones that I had, which was, the audience question was that we're aware of transparent solar panels, and we're curious if you guys have seen any of those installed on any of these dual use projects. And more generally speaking, what are the biggest differences between an agricultural project in terms of the technology and or the installation method than what you would see on, say a rooftop, a regular rooftop solar unit, or a non-agricultural ground mount installation?
Well, probably there's several differences. Number one, panel wise, you'll probably see larger size panels, just so there'll be fewer to be put in, but in some cases, not all that great of a difference. But definitely structure wise, these systems are by guidelines 8 feet above the ground minimally. And it's meant to try to give future farms the flexibility of still trying to do whatever they want. We're planning 20, 25 years with these projects. So a lot that went into the guidelines is trying to look ahead. We had a number of early requests that said, I don't need to have them that high. I only grow something, 3 feet off the ground. But we don't want to box in the future farm 5, 10 years. So the rotation needs that a farm needs to go through to change crops and locations. So what the difference is between a rooftop mount predominantly is really structural wise, or a regular ground mount system, Austin. The regular ground mount system is typically maybe 2 feet off the ground at its lowest end, maybe 3. This is minimally 8 feet off the ground. And if you're using a tracking system, it needs to be 10 feet in the horizontal position. So panel-wise, one of the things that we have seen has been some use of double-sided, so to speak, panels that have the ability to get reflected light on their backside to add to their kilowatt hour generation. Seeing that being used a lot more, especially when you've got panels that are up 8 feet off the ground versus something that might only be 2 or 3 feet off the ground, but those are also used in that application. And I think the biggest surprise to the program that at least I can say was the single axis tracking that came in. As you can see, the panels behind river were fixed south. We started seeing innovative designs that were facing those fixed panels southeast and southwest without spacing or with spacing. So if you just envision panels that are facing, off to the left or off to the right of the sun, it means that in the morning or the afternoon, you're going to get a bunch of sunlight behind those panels that adds to how much sunlight will be reaching all those crops. So that was one, the southeast, southwest idea. But the single axis tracking, which if you're not familiar with, it's where the panel, if I can use my cell phone, it's where the panel gets mounted on a horizontal bar that's north and south. So the horizontal bar is north and south on the field. The panel is mounted right on top of it, and it tracks the sun east to west throughout the course of the day. So as you can see, what it ends up doing is it allows sunlight behind the panel. It allows sunlight a lot in between the panel. The columns between these panels are usually 22, 23 feet apart. Whereas in a traditional low to the ground mounted system, they're really tight together. They're only packed far enough apart to make sure that the panel in front doesn't shade the panel behind. These projects are located and designed to ensure that they reach a certain sunlight need that the crop needs and the minimal needs are for meeting the guidelines. So the single axis tracking was a real surprise. It's used a lot in the Southwest when you're getting a lot more sunlight, but it does offer a greater variety of options for the project. Even in the future, we can possibly look at overriding the tracking as they do in Europe and see if we can pick certain times of the growing season where we have those panels actually, face directly parallel to the sunlight to allow sunlight to come in on all areas of the crop and of all the field crops that are being put in. And I think those are the primary differences. It's we see more single axis tracking. They're mounted higher off the ground. I don't know if you're going to see a lot more of that with just conventional ground mounted systems. Panels now are reaching record levels of wattages. We're up in the 400s, even 500 watts a panel. Through 2 years ago, they were 270 watts. So I don't know if you'll see that type of wattage being used on a residence or a roof mount. So it's predominantly structure. They're spread apart a lot more than a regular low to the ground mounted system. So you get more sunlight underneath, and you get a lot more trenching and cabling because of it. And those are probably the three big differences.
Thank you. As usual, we have more questions we have time for. I think we have time for one more quick one though. You mentioned earlier, Jared, specifically about some other funding opportunities that DOER has, and we did get an audience question related to this. Is there funding for any more pilot agricultural dual use pilot projects? And as part of that, could you talk about any other related funding opportunities for renewable energy on farmland?
I can try to answer that, Jared. We work with DOER a lot on our grant programs, and there was a time when we were able to get some supplemental funding from them. And these dual use projects are definitely on the high end of funding needs versus what our typical grants would be providing. So we had a special projects agricultural ag energy grant program for a while. And it was when we had that type of supplemental funding that we were able to try to offer the 6-digit number to try to add on to whatever the SMART incentive was. So we did offer it once. We haven't offered it since we stopped receiving that funding. The good news is the funding stopped because those were penalty funds being paid by all of the electric providers, and they're now meeting their needs. So they're not getting penalized anymore. The bad news is it's reduced the pool of money that could be given to other agencies for renewable energy. But we do have our annual Ag Energy Grant, which is now part of our Climate Smart program. And that's one of the programs that I helped develop with the department when I started, going on, 13, 14 years. And that provides anywhere up to $25,000 to $50,000 per applicant. And we have done a number of projects on the Cape. We've done close to 17. I was trying to get through the list last night, but a number of solar projects. We've done, if I can take a look at my side list here, we've done almost 170 kilowatts of solar, a lot of it rooftop, or some of it ground mounted as well. But we've also done some work with aquaculture down on the Cape, specifically ARC, and wasn't even necessarily solar. It was about energy efficiency with the air compressors and the need for aeration for their tanks. We've done some refrigeration projects, but a lot of the solar projects we've done have been really behind the meter, and that Ag Energy Grant program is meant to be specifically for farm needs. It's not meant to be for projects that are providing excess of energy to get exported into the system and get additional funding. The grant program is intended to meet farms' needs and be behind the meter projects. So we got a number of them, from Barnstable, Falmouth, Orleans, Marston Mills, Raynham, Harwich, Dartmouth, East Falmouth, all over the place. So we're glad that we still get interest from the Cape for doing renewable energy projects.
Well, thank you. So we are at time, but this has been really informative. So I just want to thank all three of you for donating your time to us this morning and explaining the incentive program from the state and how farm owners and the state are working together to expand clean energy. And thank you for all the work you're doing to expand solar in the Commonwealth. So with that, I want to turn it back over to Bert to close us out.
Austin, thanks so much. River, Gerry, Jared, thank you so much for this. Great information. I have one final question for you. Local farmers who want to get more information, where's the best place they go to start getting some of this?
I may be biased, Bert, but I would start with our website. I'll chat a link here in a second. But as I said, we provide lots of fact sheets about how to get started. And a lot of those links will lead you to the DOER website and the MDR website. So you can, and it has our contact information. So you're welcome to reach out. We are a public resource. We're here to help. We're mostly free for folks, and we're certainly free for phone calls and checking in. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to the UMass Clean Energy Extension. You can Google that, but I'll put a link in a second.
Great. Listen.
Yeah, and the only other I can offer, Bert, is the DOER website for the SMART program in particular. If you just go to their main website, SMART program pops up, and there's a section halfway down, not easy to identify, that talks about the agricultural program, including the SMART tool that's used to measure the shading percentage and the sunlight percentage that's on every project.
Oh, very good. Hey, Gerry, any chance you could flip that URL to me after we're done?
For the DOER website, sure.
Thank you.
Be glad to.
Yeah, great. Listen, gentlemen, thank you very much. Austin, great job moderating again. Appreciate all of you. Look forward to seeing you again. Thank you all for attending and participating today. Some great questions. And hope that we'll see you over the next couple weeks as we continue on with Earth Tech Month. So thank you all. Enjoy your wet, rainy, or in some cases, snowy Friday.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.